Hello, my name is Jeff Stackhouse, Livestock and Natural Resource Advisor in Humboldt and Del Norte counties. Today I'm going to walk you through Worksheet 10, Monitoring, of the Ranch Water Quality Planning Series. This is a visual of Worksheet 10. It can look a little intimidating at first, but really when we break it down and look at the actual components, it's not too bad. And then when you get into what you're actually asked to do, it's even less scary. So as you can see at the top, we have the visual inspections, we have residual dry matter and photo monitoring. And really when you break that down, the visual inspections can be as simple as a ranch-wide inspection where you're talking about big general trends. Maybe you had a paddock that was split in half. So instead of the south pasture, now you have south pasture west and south pasture east. Maybe you had a catastrophic event like a flood or a wildfire change some of the attributes of the property, or maybe it's just a prescribed fire you did on one of your paddocks that is a one-time seasonal thing. But this is where you would kind of step back and look at attributes and components of the ranch, both infrastructural and ecological, and document kind of the general trends you're seeing from one year to the next. Again, the next thing we're going to look at is residual dry matter. You learned about this some in Worksheet 3 if you watched that video. But really what residual dry matter is the amount of forage that is left at the end of the season. So the amount of dry grass or herbaceous matter that's remaining right before the fall rains and the green up. So that's important for a lot of different reasons, and most of those were covered in Worksheet 3. The next and last thing we'll talk about before we get into our examples are photo points. And photo points are just amazing ways to document changes over time. They're not necessarily the best for quantitative data, but they're very, very excellent for qualitative data. And I encourage you to think back into what photos you might have of your operation currently from the past. Maybe you have some from 3 or 4 generations back. Oftentimes I see them in the form of a three-ring binder, that has laminated pages, and every page is just covered in thumbprints from generations of people being handed this document as new visitors come to a ranch. So think about those examples if you have any, and maybe take digital photos of the originals and save those in the same place as you do your photo points going into the future. So have that in the back of your mind as we go through some of these other examples. Back to the Worksheet 10, the first thing I want to work you through is the visual inspections and what's required. Again, it's not too complicated, but there's some things to keep in mind and maybe some specific examples of things that you might want to capture on your operation. One of those would be, confined areas and working corrals, or any other specific area where you want to show that the ranch is in good working order. That could be roads. It could be any confined animal operation areas, but just to show that you have implemented the strategies you've heard about in other worksheets around nutrient management and avoiding sedimentation and other things. Here's an example of an off-site watering source. You would want to photograph and take pictures of any new off-site watering that you put in. And additionally, you want to take pictures of off-site watering that you have that's already in place that's functional or potentially not functional, and add it to the list of things to do for the future years or the next dry season when you can get out there. Another example that you have heard some about is problem culverts, sedimentation issues. This could be a new issue that maybe this year you had a couple severe storm events where the culvert that is usually properly sized ended up being undersized because of a severe event. Or potentially it's a longer term issue where you have inboard ditches that could potentially be too long, and that could be something you would want to take note of, so that way the following spring or the next time you have maybe an EQIP contract or a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Partners Program contract, you could consider adding that to the list of putting in a couple more rolling sedimentation blocks and increase the number of culverts to decrease the length of your inboard ditches. So just some random examples of kind of infrastructure on the ranch that you could photograph and take note of in your visual observations. In terms of timing of visual inspections, if you go through this worksheet, you'll see that it is asked of operators to do 2 dry season inspections, which includes 1 pre-rain in September and 1 post-rain in the late spring. Obviously, in the state of California, what's late spring to you is going to vary. It could be anywhere from early April to, in the North Coast, it would be late June. So take that and use the knowledge you have of your area and take photos of that early dry and the late green. Additionally, it's asked that 2 wet season inspections of the ranch are conducted following storms. And I think this is particularly important that you follow rain events or even potentially during rain events, because it allows you to see what's physically happening at the property or at the problem site. If there's an area that you want to do a restoration project or install a new culvert or whatever it may be, I think it's important to get out there and see what's happening during those storm events, so that way you can really visualize what the problem is and what potential fixes are into the future. The last visual inspection that is listed and asked of each of you is to do a stream inspection. And I think that this is important because it's important to know on longer streams especially, and perennial streams, it's important to know where the ranch is situated in terms of what is above and below the ranch itself in terms of stream quality. Often is the case that if there is a degraded stream of good size especially, that it's large stretches of the stream that is damaged and degraded. And I think it's important that the ranch manager or whoever it is that is doing these observations and taking notes what the condition is both above the ranch and below the ranch to indicate, is the problem occurring on the ranch, or is it a greater problem throughout the watershed? Additionally, on Worksheet 10, under Visual Inspections, I'd like to point out that there's a hyperlink to a great resource from Natural Resource Conservation Service on rangeland health assessment guides. And that resource is pictured here, Interpreting Indicators of Rangeland Health. It's an excellent document that has lots of helpful hints on what may be important for your region, not important for your region, but as you go through it, really try to think about where you're located on the earth and how some of these indicators and health guides could be useful on your property specifically. So that's really all there is for the visual inspections. We'll give examples at the end of this worksheet. But let's move first into the residual dry matter and the photo monitoring. And take note on this next section, highlighted in red, that there's 4 links that are all live to take you to resources, and we'll touch on those as we go through the next few slides. The first of which is kind of the idea of residual dry matter and what it looks like. And this is an example of light grazing on the left and heavy grazing on the right. So the light grazing would be high RDM, or high residual dry matter, and on the right, the heavy grazing would be low RDM, low residual dry matter. And not to say that heavy grazing and low RDM is negative. I think it's very important to point that out, because that could be fully intended by the manager. Say that the right side had an invasive species and they wanted to use livestock to eradicate that species, or potentially even the right side was included in a prescribed burn to eradicate that species, which has left no residual dry matter. Furthermore, maybe just outside of this screen is the homestead or the farmstead, and the rancher has decided that he wants to implement heavy grazing to reduce wildfire risk for him and his neighbors. So there's plenty of reasons why you may desire to have low RDM. And I think that if you do have low RDM, it's important, and if you have low RDM and it was intentional, it's important to note why you were doing what you were doing. So that way people, 30 years from now can look at your notes and say, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Why there was this fence line effect in the middle of the ranch. So I think that's important to note. And then conversely, the same can be said for light grazing or essentially no grazing. Potentially on the light grazing side, maybe they're trying to implement a prescribed burn on that side and they want it to consume woody brush that's encroaching on the rangeland. So, the right side could have been grazed heavily because 100% of the cattle were pushed onto half of the ranch to allow for an improvement on the other half. So there's lots of reasons why you would want light or heavy grazing, and I think it's just important to note, why you are where you are after you've done your residual dry matter assessment. So how do we measure residual dry matter? Well, one method is to clip a specific area, take the vegetation from your clippings, put it in an oven and dry it, and then weigh it, take the weight, and then back calculate to get your pounds per acre. So that's how we do it in most research trials. Another method is the visual estimation method. And in your worksheet 10 is a great hyperlink that takes you to Wildland Solutions, where they have a publication that has photos and a guide to work you through the steps of the visual calculations. Within that guide are these great photos that help you really understand not only how it's done, but what it looks like when it's done. So in both of these pictures, you see a rowbell pole, which is that zebra striped object, and it has white and red or black stripes, depending on the pole itself, every inch. And what that does is allow you to measure the height of the grass and the density of the grass basically at that height. So you read it up until you cannot see the number that is hidden behind the grass, and that's your rowbell pole estimate. Next to that rowbell pole, you also see these balls or golf balls, sometimes tennis balls, depending on the person that's conducting the survey. But that's another great visual indicator of what you can see and how much grass that's there blocking what you can see. So in these two examples, it's both of residual dry matter of less than 1,000 pounds. And obviously you can see most of both the pole and the balls on the site. Now, as you look at residual dry matter over 1,000 pounds, once you get past 20 feet, you can't see any of those tennis balls or golf balls. And as you observe, particularly on the left with residual dry matter of over 1,500 pounds per acre, you can see that rowbell pole, when you get out 10 to 20 feet, really you can't see much past about 9 inches or on the top or 7 inches on the bottom, depending on your distance away from that pole. And this worksheet really walks you through the step-by-step process of how to do that, how to get an accurate estimate. And I think for most ranch work, the visual estimations are going to be much faster and plenty good enough data to support you going forward. The clipping and weighing is going to have a lot more time, effort, energy, and for what we need today on our monitoring projects, I think that in most cases having something is better than having nothing at all. One of the other great hyperlinks on Worksheet 10 takes you to this Guidelines for Residual Dry Matter on Coastal and Foothill Rangelands in California by James Bartolome. And it's a great publication that you can go through, and it has some tables that I'll show you in a minute. But another one that isn't on this Worksheet 10 is to revisit Worksheet 3 on pasture inventory techniques. I highly advise you to watch that video if you haven't seen it yet. In Bartolome et al.'s paper, you'll find that they have these really handy tables that help you estimate what the minimum residual dry matter should be approximately on your ranch or for your geographic area. And it's going to vary on even on an individual ranch, from pasture to pasture or from one end of the pasture to the other end of the pasture. And the reason is, as you can see on these tables, On the left-hand column, you see woody cover, and it's a percentage. So you're giving an ocular estimate of what the percent woody cover is. So you know how many trees or how much brush and what have you. And then you know as you look across to the right, those numbers there are for percent slope, so the steepness of the ground. So most of us know that we have plenty of paddocks and pastures that go from, you know, flat open ground up into steep brushy ground. So take that in, you know, into consideration as you're thinking about what your minimum should be for a paddock as you're going through. In this example here, I have, you know, a ranch or a paddock that has some woody cover. You know, picture some of our foothill range country where there's kind of clumps of oaks, but they're scattered. And then, you know, not too steep, not too rugged. Maybe we're 15% or 20% slopes. You know, that it gives you an idea that you should be around 600 pounds per acre. It's going to vary based on where you are, your soil types, your vegetation types, but you know, it gives you a ballpark estimate. You're not going to be at 6,000. You're not going to be at 60. So it gives you a place to start, and I suggest pulling up, you know, if you're not going to take the time to read the whole publication, at least pull up these tables, think about your different paddocks, maybe even, you know, print a map or you know, or make an Excel spreadsheet for your ranch that has each pasture and what you think the minimum residual dry matter standard should be for that piece of ground. Here's another great publication from the University of California Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources. And what I like about this one is you don't have to read it. It's a 20-minute YouTube video, and it is pretty handy. And it's not listed on your worksheet 10, but if you take the time to hit pause and capture that link at the bottom and write it down and type it in, it'll take you directly to this peer-reviewed publication from the Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources on YouTube. So I'd suggest taking the 20 minutes and watching it for a revision as well. So lots and lots of resources out there on residual dry matter and management of it in the state of California. Next in the worksheet, we're getting towards the bottom, are the photo monitoring points. So photographs are taken basically at the same location over time, and then it does a good job of documenting residual dry matter, new conservation practices, and improvements on the ranch, both seeding improvements, so like ecological type improvements, but also infrastructure improvements. The one thing I'll note that I think is really valuable for the residual dry matter monitoring with photo points is that in some landscapes where there are not good visual indicators, like there's no trees or you know, rock piles or something like that you can use as an anchor point in your photo monitoring. I have seen people use, you know, T-posts or something like that, and then have a small white erase board where they write the date and the location, you know, the pasture maybe, the year, and I've even seen the animal unit months or the stocking rate on there. And then they set that out and then take a picture of it, and I think it does a good job of keeping the photos organized, so that way 10 years from now when you're looking back, you have more than just a date and a bunch of photos of grass behind you. With that in mind, this is a link there on your worksheet 10 of a publication written by Neil McDougall and others, and it's on photo monitoring for better land use planning and assessment. I think this is, again, another good publication. It's not too long, and it has some great ideas for things that may work for you on your operation. This is just a very short, quick example of what photo monitoring looks like. So this example has lots of anchors on it. You know, there's the two trees in the foreground, there's the wall of firs on the left, a little maybe poison oak bush down in the bottom. And on this property, they implemented a restoration project. And as you can see in this picture, they fenced out that low area, and it's changed quite a bit and has more growth. I'll go back to the last slide just for reference again. But you can see the two trees in the front ground are, you know, they have grown with time, and the site has changed quite a bit. The one complaint I have about this picture, in particularly in this photo point, is that it wasn't done at the same time of year on these two photos. So I think it's important that if you're thinking about doing photo monitoring or really for any of these monitoring protocols, it's important to do it the same time of year. So if it were me, I would set a recurring calendar date on my smartphone that would remind me every September 5th I need to drive around the ranch and take pictures and fill out a form. Every winter after a good storm event, I'll go out and take a couple pictures of the things I want to do the following year. And then in the spring, I would set an alarm or a calendar date on my phone for May 30th or something like that in the North Coast to go out and just have consistent dates and have 6 or 7 photo monitoring points across the ranch that I take at different times of year. So now that we have ran through visual inspections, residual dry matter, and photo monitoring, let's go back to the worksheet and run through a quick set of examples. So, like we said, we have to monitor every September because that's the 1 month that is set in stone. So let's go September 5, 2020. For our date that I'm going to put in my calendar. It's going to remind me every year. And I'm going to go back to that south pasture I was telling you about earlier. And we're going to do a visual representation of RDM. Let's say there's 850 pounds per acre. We thought that there would be 600 pounds per acre. So we have a heck of a lot more than what we needed. But why do we have more? And I'm gonna say that split pasture did light grazing for prescribed fire in October 2020. So the reason that we have that much RDM is that we got the cows out of there early because we want to do a prescribed burn to reduce heavy fuels and hazardous fuels around the house for the following year, now that we know that we have catastrophic wildfires every year. So we're planning a burn in the fall of 2020, and we're out there monitoring right before we get there. So also on September 5th, we're going to go look at the watering, or let's call it offsite water south pasture 3. So we have 3 offsite waters in that pasture, and we're going to go look at them and make sure that they're working. We're going to skip over the RDM because it's not residual dry matter. But here we're gonna say photo of leaky pipe needs repair, right? So it's just something that we drove down there, we looked at it. It's still kind of functioning. There's water in the troughs. The calves and cows aren't dying. But at some point we need to get down there and fix that darn leaky pipe that's been there for 3 years. So. I could keep going with these examples, but you get the idea. So again, on September 5th, 2020, we're gonna do a ranch ocular assessment, and we're gonna do visual again and a photo, and we're gonna say that on the ranch maybe there's some high areas, maybe there's some low areas, but we're gonna say it's about right for what we think it should be. And we're gonna say that annual photo at North County Road lookout, because it's a spot above the ranch where we can drive up there in about 3 minutes on the side-by-side, take the pole out, and it's a high spot, and we can take a picture of the whole ranch as it lays below us. So maybe it's a spot where you have a photo from your great-grandfather, and it was in the, sometime during the dry season, so you're gonna start adding it into your annual photo points, and get an estimate as you look over the hill. Oh, that's about what it looks like. Or actually, this year there's a lot more bare ground than we're used to seeing because we had a drought. Or shoot, maybe it's pretty yellow because we had a great late spring and the timing was perfect. So whatever it is, I think that you get the idea. It doesn't have to be really high tech or specific data, but working through this worksheet 10 doesn't have to be complicated. There's a lot of great resources at these hyperlinks, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact your local UC Cooperative Extension Livestock and Natural Resources Advisor.
You can find more informative presentations covering ranch water quality topics on the UC Rangelands website, and look for the Water Quality Information Hub or direct your web browser to the URL shown on this slide.